Welcome to the Game of Her Own podcast, a podcast about women who work in sports. I'm your host, Jahaan Blake. After 15 years of working for 3 major league teams, including the Boston Red Sox, Los Angeles Dodgers, and the Chicago Cubs, I discovered the one thing I loved the most was helping women in sports shatter glass ceilings and take their seat at the table. I loved it so much that I made a business out of it. I have the honor of coaching high-performing women in the sports and entertainment industry and supporting them as they go after exactly what they want in their career. So if you are feeling tired of waiting on the sidelines, done being overlooked for promotions, and you're ready to pull ahead of the pack and take your career to the next level, girl, I'm here for it. I also created the Game of Her Own podcast to support you as well. We are here to share the stories of incredible women who work in sports and entertainment. These leaders and trailblazers will inspire you with their success and the lessons they've learned along the way to the top. Ladies, there is nothing like women empowering women. I am so honored you're here. Oh yes, I am so excited for you to hear my next guest. When I first met Sam Coghill, it was back in the day when we were both working for the Chicago Cubs. I knew when we met, she was a total boss. She still is. A girl from the south suburbs of Chicago. She grew up on golf, the White Sox, the Bulls, and get this, AM radio. Yep, as a little girl, Sam liked AM radio. Sam is now the vice president of stadium operations for the Miami Dolphins, and I can't wait for you to hear about her incredible journey. She shares it all, including how she got her start in the minor leagues, and how she handled the first opportunity she had to work for a major league team. Let's just say this, she didn't say yes to the opportunity, but Sam did ask for what she wanted. All right, ladies, it is time to jump in. Sam, welcome to the Game of Her Own podcast. I am so glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here, Jahaan. How are you?
I am doing well. Better now that I get to start my morning with you. All right, so I want you to take us back in time and tell us when you first fell in love with sports.
So I grew up in a south suburb of Chicago, and my family's been in the golf business, and so we've always been pretty active in kind of like outdoor sports. But one of my earliest memories is my dad, getting me and my 2 sisters to bed, and then him sneaking back up to my room and letting me come downstairs and watch Chicago White Sox games. And was just like, I was a huge White Sox fan growing up. And I was fortunate enough to grow up in Chicago, during the 80s and 90s. So, The Last Dance, like I lived all of that as like a 10-year-old kid in 1990. Like I only listened to AM radio. So I listened to AM radio for like 7 years of my life as like 10 to 17, basically.
What 10 to 17-year-old listens to that was the one thing I never went. I was like, no, I can't deal with the talk radio. Not at that age.
my entire like teenage years, I listened to AM radio. Like I had a survey to fill out today about like, what's your favorite genre of music? And I just like started laughing. I was like, can I put AM radio? Like that's just so absurd. But yeah, that's how I grew up. I mean, it was the Bulls in the 90s. And it was like the most magical time to be in Chicago as a kid, super invested in, like, we would have draft parties, even though the Bulls would be drafting like last in the first round because they were always winning. Mm-hmm. Everything the Bulls did, it was just the biggest thing ever. So I think that being part of my history kind of drove that passion throughout my career.
And then if I remember a story you told me when we first met at the Cubs, yeah. I think you said, you're gonna have to tell your own story here, but something about how when you were in college in your sorority, everyone would like run down to get the mail. Tell us that story. I loved that story.
Yeah, and I told it the other day because I was talking to a young man who goes to Indiana University, and he was asking me about my college experience. So went to IU, and partially because the history of like Indiana basketball was one of those things that like, it just had this like, just this magical allure to it. So went to Indiana, great school, go Hoosiers. And I was in a sorority, and on Tuesdays, I think it was like magazine day. So like everyone would go downstairs to go get their magazines, right? And like Us Weekly and People. And I was the only one getting ESPN the magazine. And like one of my sorority sisters looked at me at one point. She's like, Sam, no one wants that one. Like, you don't have to rush down with everybody. It's fine. It's fine.
I love that story. I honestly can't remember to like take the dogs for a walk, but for some reason I remember that story.
Remember that story. Yeah.
It was hilarious.
But I remember that moment of like, okay, well, I'm really excited to have it.
And at the same time, I'm in college. I mean, you're younger than me, but I'm in college, and I would set my TV to ESPN to wake me up with SportsCenter. So like every morning it was like, and I didn't mind getting up. Now it's not the same, and I hate my alarm. But that's why I was like, I like Sam. I was like, we're the same people.
Yeah, we've got that for sure.
So I love that your dad used to put you guys to bed, then come back and get you, bring you down to watch the games. When did you realize you wanted to work in sports?
So that was the interesting thing. Like, so I go to college, and you go in as like, you're kind of undecided, general studies, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and discovered that there was a sport communication broadcast degree that I could earn. I thought that was really interesting. And I loved sports. I loved learning about sports. And then when I started to understand that there was an entire business behind sports, like that was the thing that I was kind of like, okay, like I could really get into this. That's kind of what I dove into when I was at Indiana. And I was planning on going to law school afterwards, because I wasn't really sure about like what I wanted to do in sports. I knew I wanted to do something, but I was like, do I want to go be an agent or work for an agent or work in the business side? And so I was going to go to law school, and quite honestly had this moment at the end of my senior year. I had taken the LSAT, it started getting ready to apply to schools, and I was just like, I'm done. I need a break from school. So I was fortunate. My senior year at Indiana, we went to the national championship in basketball in 2002. It's just a great run for us, kind of a surprise run for the Hoosiers. So it was a really fun way to go out. Ended up in Buffalo, New York with an unpaid internship with the Buffalo Bisons, like about 4 days after I graduated.
I did not know that. So that's how you got your foot in the door, the Buffalo Bisons.
Yes, the Buffalo Bison. So my mom grew up in a really small town in rural Illinois, and she grew up with this guy named Pete Weber. And Pete was the longtime voice of many teams in Buffalo, including the Bills, Bisons, and the Sabres. He's currently play-by-play, I believe, for the Nashville Predators, and he's been with the Predators throughout their entire existence. And so Pete was kind enough to connect me with the folks in Buffalo, and I packed up my car and drove to Buffalo, New York, and spent, one glorious summer in Buffalo.
All right, unpaid internship. So you definitely paid your dues.
Yes.
What did you do next? How did you make your way to where we met at the Cubs?
Yeah. So what I would say about my minor league experience is that I did everything except for pull tarp and be the mascot. Too short to be the mascot. And during rain delays, my job was actually to go and get some of our broadcasters' kids and make sure that they were okay, because it was going to be a pretty long rain delay. So I had a role, but I did everything in Buffalo. It was I taught base running for Eric Wedge, who was our manager at the time during our Buffalo Bisons camp, which was very entertaining. I'll tell you one story that was really funny. So while we were running camps, he's like, how about you do tours for us too? I'm like, great. So I'm taking all these kids through like the locker room, and they're like 7 years old. And the two questions I got immediately: how come there's only one big shower room? Does everyone take showers together? Okay. And the next question is, why are there so many beers in here? And I'm like, okay. Right? Like, I'm 21 years old, not equipped to answer these questions for 7-year-olds. At the time, it was hilarious. So I really enjoyed my time in Buffalo. And through Pete, again, he helped connect me to the folks at the Atlanta Thrashers. So had some interviews, went down to Atlanta, ended up as a marketing intern with the Thrashers. And, my job was helping recruit college kids to sell tickets on campus and, coordinating our college days at Phillips Arena, and really had a good experience down there. The assistant general manager of the Thrashers at the time was a guy named Derek Schiller. And Derek and I got along really well. Like, he's quick and smart and witty, and for some reason he liked me, is what I'd always say, is that like Derek and I got on pretty well together. And he's really tough. So that was something that I was always, we built a really good relationship, but I realized I hadn't had a lot of interview experience at that point. It was all over the phone, or, we didn't do Skype interviews or Zoom interviews at the time. So I went to the winter meetings in Nashville, and I interviewed for every position I possibly could find. And I probably, I ended up having 5 job offers at the end of the winter meetings. And it was everything from a single A club in Potomac, Maryland, to the position I ended up taking, which was helping start the group sales department for the Indianapolis Indians and being the in-stadium MC. So I got 2 jobs. Yes. Yes.
I did not know this. Okay, everyone who's listening, Sam and I work together at the Cubs, but there are things that I am learning. This is crazy. So you were in stadium PA.
Oh yeah. Yes, I was the MC, like Dizzy Bat Race, John Deere Derby.
Oh, okay, got it.
Right, I was a microphone girl. So I'm fortunate to go to Indianapolis, and Indianapolis has this beautiful ballpark in downtown Indy. It's right across from Lucas Oil right now, and it was close to the RCA Dome. About 15,000 people, had a big video board. It was the largest video board in minor league baseball. And I was group sales and then also the in-stadium MC. So it was like during the day, I'd be selling tickets. We started Boy Scout night, Girl Scout night, all the big, groups that you can possibly get to the stadium. And then also just running those events. So I had a lot of fun. I, again, never had to pull tarp because I had to look presentable because I was always going to be on the field. So I did that for about 2 years.
I have an important question.
Yes.
Is there video footage of you as the MC?
I'm sure there is somewhere. I don't have any of it, but I bet if I went to Indianapolis, and I know the GM, Randy, there, I haven't talked to him in a long time, but I could probably call him and maybe see if we could dig something up.
I would have never guessed that. I don't see it, and I need to see footage of this.
Yeah. So but I'm working in minor league baseball, so it's like you're not getting paid a whole lot, and you're like paying your dues. So I also worked at Ruth's Chris as a hostess in downtown Indy. And I can't tell you how many times people would I'd seat them at their table, and they're like, "You're just so familiar. Like, I can't place it." And then they'd come back to me in the middle of dinner. They're like, "You're the microphone girl." I'm like, "Yes, I am. I am the microphone."
That is me. At this point, when you're going through all this, and I'm sure you're loving all these different experiences and being in sports, do you have an ultimate goal in mind, or are you just kind of going along for the ride and seeing what kind of happens?
So I had this goal. I wanted to eventually work myself into a corporate partnership role by the time I was 30, right? That was kind of like, this is what I'm going to do.
Okay, got it.
You have to keep in mind, at the time I'm selling $5 and $8 tickets in Indianapolis. So my second season there, I sold like $320,000 worth of $5 and $8 tickets, which is like a lot of tickets. Really bad at working on Arctics and the Ticketmaster system. Which is funny because my counterpart that I worked with in Indianapolis, he's in ticket operations for the PGA Tour right now. So half the time, I'd get an order in, I'm like, "Can you help me put this in? I am just terrible at working the system." I knew what my strengths were. I knew where I could use some help. So he had a nice career in ticket ops. So I reached the end of the second year in Indianapolis, and Derek Schiller calls me. And I get this voicemail from him, and he's like, "You don't write, you don't call, I thought we were buddies." So we talk, and he goes, "Do you want to sell tickets for a big league club?" And I just said, "No, I don't." I said, "I think I'm pretty good at selling sponsorships. I've started to sell sponsorships here in Indianapolis, and I think the next move for me is to find a job in sponsorships." And he kind of laughed. And the next day I got a call from Jim Allen, who's the vice president of corporate partnerships for the Braves now. He still is. And Jim started off going, "Oh, think we got somebody in common. We got a friend in common." And so we started talking about Derek and, my past history at the Thrashers. And, within a couple days, I was on my way to Atlanta for an interview and was fortunate enough to land a position in the organization, in the partnership group, working for Jim and ultimately for Derek as well.
Talk more about why Derek picked up the phone and called you. Why you think, at least, right?
Yeah. So Derek and I, like I said, we built a really good relationship. And my roommate in Atlanta worked at the ad agency that worked with the Braves. And I think they ran into each other one night. And he's like, "Where's Sam? I haven't talked to her. She hasn't called me." And she's like, "You should give her a call." So he called me the next day. He had just moved over from the Thrashers. Derek and Mike Plant came over they were kind of the new leadership at the Braves. And I think this is 2003, 2004. And he was starting to kind of build his team. And I was fortunate enough to be one of those people that came to mind. And my old roommate ran into him at the right time. And, I feel very fortunate that happened because Derek called and sent me down to Atlanta for the next 4 years.
I love that story. So it's all about the relationships that you nurtured, although Derek said you didn't call him for a while, but that's all right. But while you were working with him, you know what I mean? Like, you form these relationships, and while it didn't work out right away, like, I'm sure one of his first phone calls when he's building this team.
And I was junior level at that point. I think in 2004, I'm 24 years old, but had made an impression on him. When I went down there to interview with him, we had some pretty funny conversations. He's like, "So what's holding you up from this job?" And I was just like, I just bought a house. He's like, "Sam, you can sell that." I was like, "I got a boyfriend." He goes, "Sam, business decision. Get rid of him." I was like, "Okay." He goes, "Listen, I'm your Sherpa." And I just remember that conversation, and I just laughed. I'm like, "All right." And obviously I ended up taking that job.
Wait, did you get rid of the boyfriend?
Yes. And I met my husband the day I moved to Atlanta.
Oh, it's got the chills. I love that. Oh, good advice, Derek. Okay, yeah. Good.
Have I ever told you how I met Jeff?
No, tell us.
Oh my God. Okay, so I moved down to Atlanta, and I go to a Halloween party that night. I've moved all day. I'm tired. I go as the new kid, right? I wear like a Chicago White Sox t-shirt and a name tag that says, "Hi, my name's Sam," because I just moved that day. And I'm like just irritated kind of to be there. And I get hit in the back with something after I'd been there for about 5 minutes. And I turn around, and there is a man standing there in a nude bodysuit, diapers, wings, heart-shaped glasses, and a bow and arrow. And he goes, "You're the first person I shot tonight." And I go, "What the hell is wrong with you, you weirdo? Leave me alone."
Oh my God.
So 15 years later, the conversations have not changed, but we've got kids, and we've been married for 11 years.
Oh my God.
Yes.
That is a fantastic story.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you've met your husband. You don't know it's going to be your husband at the time, but you're in Atlanta. You're there for 4 years, correct? All under the umbrella of you're working corporate partnerships.
Corporate partnerships, yep. And so I started off selling and servicing my own accounts, and it was all like local deals. A lot of it was trade deals, hotels, things that the organization could use where we were able to trade out some tickets. Mm-hmm. And then had worked my way into kind of a role where I was just strictly selling. And part of my, I told you, like, Chicago is part of me, and I always wanted to move back to Chicago. I knew I'd kind of go and cut my teeth elsewhere, and if I could get back to Chicago, that would be terrific for me. So I actually had an interview with the Chicago Bears in the fall of 2008, didn't get the job. And it was really funny because the other people who interviewed me in the partnership group with the Bears called me afterwards, and they're like, "We wanted you." And I was like, "Okay, well, thanks for calling, I guess. I'm happy that you guys got who you wanted." So I didn't end up getting that job. And that was kind of it was hard, but I loved what I was doing in Atlanta. So it wasn't devastating, right? Like, it wasn't like I was looking to leave for any other reason, but I felt drawn to go back to Chicago.
You liked what you did. So what you were doing for the Braves. So it was hard.
Yeah.
But you were going back to something you loved doing, which made it a little, like, soften the blow a little bit. But talk a little bit about dealing with that rejection, right? A lot of, we all go through it. So just talk about how you handled it.
Yeah. And, for me, the real reason why I was also looking is that both Jim and Derek, like, they're still at the Braves, and they're both amazing and incredible, but they're not going anywhere. So for me, when I started thinking about, like, advancing my career and how I was going to do that, I realized I was probably going to have to move. And Chicago is where I'd end up going back. In all honesty, from a rejection standpoint, the primary reason that they actually gave me was that they didn't think I was Chicago enough and local enough, which, like, Jahaan, me, it's like, I'm probably as much of a Chicagoan as you probably have encountered in your time.
100%. I
Yeah.
was so grateful to meet you and at the Cubs because of that reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was just one of
Huh.
those things I was like, well, I guess I can't compete with, I don't know how to counteract that. I live in Atlanta right now. I'm doing national deals in Atlanta. I think I can translate that to Chicago. And, I was confident in my abilities, but it wasn't the right thing at the right time. And I was okay with that. So fast forward to, it was the Winter Classic in Chicago. So it's, New Year's Day, 2009.
Mhm.
And I end up running into a friend at an agency in Chicago, and he calls me and a day later and he's like, hey, are you interested in moving to Chicago? Like, we've got some positions at our agency. I think you'd be great for them. So we started talking a little bit, and I ended up calling a couple other people. And one of those folks gave me a call and said, hey, I've got a perfect opportunity for you. It's the assistant director of partnerships for the Chicago Cubs. And I was like, okay, baseball. He's like, day baseball. And I was like, oh, okay, day baseball, right? A little bit different,
Yes.
because at that point I was engaged, and obviously I wanted to start a family at a certain point. And so I was just kind of thinking about what the future would hold, and was fortunate enough to end up getting the position with the Cubs. It was very entertaining when Mark McGuire interviewed me. He asked me, Mark, yeah, he goes, all right, I know where you grew up. Are you a Sox fan? I go, well, I'm a Braves fan today because they pay the bills. You hire me tomorrow, I'll be a Cubs fan, right?
That was my line too.
Okay, Sam, fine, fair enough. But I was fortunate in the fact that the director of tickets operations, I don't know if you remember him, Frank Maloney. Was Frank there when you were there?
Yes,
Okay.
he was there. Mm-hmm.
Frank actually just passed away a couple months ago, but Frank's wife was a teacher at my high school. And so Mark actually called Frank and was like, okay, I've got a kid from Orland Park, Illinois that we're interviewing. And Frank was able to check with his wife, and Frank knew my family just from, being in, he's like, they're a really good family. So he's like, all right, Frank vouched for you. And Frank was like the head football coach at Syracuse and had this incredible career. And like, it was really, again, one of those moments where like unexpected people run into your life and they just help. So it was pretty cool.
Yes. And that stamp of approval, I'm doing air quotes from Frank, that's huge.
Yeah, it was.
That's huge. Okay. So now you're working at the Cubs. A year later, we got to meet when I got there, and still in partnerships, right?
Yep.
And how long were you there for at the Cubs?
So I was at the Cubs from 2009 until I think it was 14. Like, it's a little hazy because I stayed involved with the Cubs organization for my entire time while I was in Chicago. So I start with the Cubs in March of 2009, and Wally Hayward started in November of 2009. So Wally came into the organization right after the Ricketts family bought the team. Mm-hmm. And he was our new chief sales and marketing officer at the organization. I was promoted into leading the partnership group, I don't know, maybe about 9 months after Wally had started. Was also pregnant with my first child at the time. I had Hallie, who's 9.
I remember that when you call, I kept commenting, which anyone who's listening, do not do this, but for some reason I found it okay to comment on Sam's snacking every time I came into her office. And finally she called me back in and was like, I need to tell you a secret. Like, I don't want you to think I'm crazy that I'm always snacking, and here's why. So never comment on anybody, woman or man, snacking, but for some reason I was comfortable enough and I did that.
Yeah, your metabolism must be through the roof.
Well, that was, you were so tiny too, so I'm just like, God, I wish I could snack like that. So maybe I was just a little jealous. Hey, Jahaan here. I hope you're enjoying the interview. I'm sure you are thinking about your own career right now and how you can pull out in front of the pack to take your career to the next level. For 18 years, supporting women in sports has been my favorite part of my career, and I would love to support you. Whether it's joining my free Game of Her Own community or one of my one-on-one coaching programs, I am here for you. Send me a message at jblake@jahaanblake.com or DM me on Instagram at jahaanblake, and let's schedule a time to have a free session. I cannot wait to hear from you. All right, let's get back to why you're here. So you were there first, then Wally came. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Talk to us what that was like, getting a new boss, and how you sort of showed who you were, like, in the value that you brought to the table.
So my first interaction with Wally was pretty funny. Like I had been on vacation and I walked in. I mean, like I took a 3-day honeymoon after I got married to Wisconsin because it was in the middle of baseball season. So I was like, well, we'll do something else. So we ended up going to San Diego and San Francisco for a couple of days. Again, went to go see the Bears play the 49ers on Monday Night Football in San Francisco. Jeff married into this. This is just what I did.
And you listened to AM radio while you were driving.
AM radio. Exactly. So I come back and a woman who worked on my team, she's like, we have a new boss. And I was like, okay. She's like, do you know who Wally Hayward is? I was like, I've heard of him. She's like, he's our new boss. And I was like, okay. So Wally had just come off the 2016 Olympic bid with the city of Chicago. He was running the commercial efforts for that for Pat Ryan. Obviously, Brazil ended up winning that bid. Wally became available and he was hired at the Cubs. I walked into his office and I said, hi, I'm Sam. This is what my role is. And I was like, we've been waiting for you. And he kind of gave me this look of like, what does that mean? I was like, we need some help. I had come from I think the Braves are a really well-run organization. And I loved my experience there. And I think coming to the Cubs organization, an amazing group of people, an amazing property, amazing brand, but they were also able to just do what they had always done. And they're selling out every day, right? So it was just like, I thought there was just a lot more that we could do. And I was really excited to see someone who was a marketer and had worked with agencies and had global experience to be able to come in and really help build our team and build our partnership strategy. So I think Wally saw me pretty quickly as someone who was ready to like jump in, learn, and was willing to do whatever it took to kind of get things done.
So you just simply went in and said, hi.
Yeah.
Introduced yourself and just, you were happy that he was there and you just shared that. So you didn't go in like complaining.
No,
talking about the change. It was almost like you knew their change needed to be made. I'm sure you had some strategies and ideas of your own that you thought you should implement, but you just kind of went in and just, hey, I'm glad you're here, which I'm sure for anybody who inherits staff, you don't know, right? There's that elephant in the room of, did they want my position, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to get it, but like, you know what I mean? Like, is there that awkwardness, right? Like, are they happy I'm here? Is there someone else they wanted in this role? You're not shoving things down his throat immediately. It's just, I'm here, and just established who you are and why you were excited that he was going to lead some change.
Yep. And Wall and I had a great run together. So while it was both at the Cubs and then afterwards at W Partners, the kind of the story I would always tell about like Wally and my relationship is like, I'd come in, I'd be like, Wall, I'm so excited. I talked to the VP of marketing at this company last night, and this is what he told me. And Wally would just go like, oh yeah, I played paddle tennis with his boss last night. You know that's true.
Yes. He
knows everybody.
Yes. Everybody. He is like the mayor, like literally every single person.
He's as Chicago as they get. So it was hilarious. I'd always be like, all right, well, whatever. Let's get our information together and like, let's make sure we do the best deal we can. So had a great time at the Cubs with Wally as the renovation of Wrigley Field was kind of like looming. He had an idea to start a agency that was dedicated towards selling partnerships for the Cubs, as the Ricketts family were not going to receive any city, county, or state funding for the restoration of Wrigley Field, and it was all going to be privately funded, and partnerships was going to lead the way on that. He started W Partners, and myself and Megan Cornish were fortunate enough to go along with, and we started that process of legacy partnerships with the Cubs and W Partners. And we did some terrific deals. The Toyota sign on the Wrigley Field marquee. I mean, you know this, I did the Toyota sign on the outfield, which was the first outfield sign at Wrigley Field. And the story behind that is a crazy one, a lot of fun.
I remember that. That was
a good one.
Big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, like sitting at city council meetings where people were talking about migratory birds and all sorts of stuff, like how it was going to impede and ruin the neighborhood. But yeah, just a lot of really interesting learnings through that period of time. So we started W Partners, had a lot of great success selling partnerships for the Cubs and some other properties like the James Beard Foundation, the city of Chicago. Did some cool stuff with that. And then I had a moment where I was like, I think I'm ready to get back to work for a property. And I don't know what that means yet, but I like working for a team. The agency world was fine for a little bit, and it was an experience. And the universe works in funny ways. And within a week, I had a call from the Mets, the Braves, and the Dolphins.
Wait, I'm sorry. Let's back up. Oh, a headhunter. I was like, I'm sorry, your phone just rang. I was like, talk about manifesting what you want and just putting it out there. Okay, got it. So you had a headhunter to help you.
No, he came to me. Yeah.
Oh.
So he just came to me and said, hey, there's this job. I think you'd be perfect for it. I quickly eliminated the Mets. We weren't going to move anywhere colder, but Atlanta was obviously very appealing to me because of my history there and the folks that I'd be able to go work for again. And then, the Dolphins. And I was fortunate enough to go down and visit the folks at the Dolphins, which was really funny. So when they took me out to dinner, they took me to this place called Lobster Bar. And I said to them, I'm like, you guys are pretty confident. They're like, because they knew I was interviewing in Atlanta as well. And they're like, what do you mean? I flipped over the back of the menu because Lobster Bar is part of Buckhead Life Group, which is based in Atlanta. I'm like, so you're taking me to an Atlanta-based restaurant while I'm here interviewing? And they just lost it. And it's actually funny that we were at dinner because the night before, or the first visit that I went down to Miami, actually, it was Cowboys game in 2015. And so we watched the game in the suite, and I meet a whole bunch of people. And then afterwards, it's Sunday night. And they kind of are like, oh, okay, you want to go out to dinner right now? And I just looked at him and I go, no. And the head of HR just kind of like looks at me. He's like, what? I go, I know what game days are. Go home. Like, you don't want to go out to dinner with me right now. Go home. I'll see you tomorrow.
Nice.
Right? It's just like, I know how long those days are. And I didn't want necessarily to put that on anyone. So it was like, we'll have a good day tomorrow. We'll get through a lot of stuff. Like, you'll know exactly who I am by the time we're done. So we fast forward, I end up taking the job in Miami, and 6 months into the job in partnerships, our CEO, and he's our vice chair now, Tom Garfinkel, pulls me into his office and he says, I have an idea. I'd like you to run HR for me. And I just start laughing. And he's like, what's so funny? I was like, a month ago, I told my husband, I don't know if this is real, but I think Tom wants to see if I'm a fit for HR. And so we had about a 3-hour conversation about like his organizational philosophy and like how he views HR in the business as performance management. And yeah, it is benefits and some of the more traditional roles, but also wanting to help put the right people in the right place and teach them different skills, and that nonlinear growth is really important in your career. And I was fortunate enough to be put in the position of running the HR department for the Dolphins, and was learning directly from Tom, learned directly from Jeremy Campos, who was the director of HR and had been in the role for a couple years. So I was able to learn from him and what he had kind of accomplished in his career. And then also had some great resources. I sent you a couple pictures there's one of 2 women. One is the VP of HR for the Minnesota Vikings, Laura Juris. She was down at the Braves throughout my career.
Yes, I was like, I know that name.
Okay. Yes, yeah, so that's Laura. So I'd call Laura a lot and just ask her. I'm like, hey, this is what I'm doing. And then Beth Marshall, who's the head of VP and head of communications for the Braves. And they're 2 of my closest friends and people who have been really important in my career. And I've known them for since 2004, 2005, but have always really kept in close contact with the 2 of them.
So you're a partnership girl in my mind, right?
Yes.
Obviously, you know yourself better than I do. How did you make that, like, what made it okay for you to say, you know what, I'm going to go over to HR and you're a VP of HR, correct?
Yeah, so I moved over as the senior director of HR. The thing that made it okay for me is that I had this, along with knowing that I wanted to work for a property, I also knew that I needed more tools in my tool belt. So part of it was like, I can be the partnership person my entire career, or how do I continue to learn and how do I continue to grow and learn some new things? And so I was fortunate enough to have that opportunity at the Dolphins. And that was one of my favorite things in HR, was being able to find people in different departments. And when we had an internal position, it's like, oh, what about this person? And be able to move them within the organization so they could learn something new and they could help grow their career. So that was, it was a risk. I had a friend who's at CAA, career partnership person, call me and he's like, "Are you okay? Do you need a job? Why are you in HR?" I was like, no, I'm good. I'm great. And had to explain it to him. He's like, I'm not sure I get it, but okay. Call me if you need it.
I was thinking the same thing. And I was like, let me check on Sam. I wish I sent you a message because I was thinking the same thing. Like, what's happening down in Miami right now?
Oh, I had people call and they're like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm good." And I'd explain it. And, you know, a friend of mine, John Shea, he's the CMO of Mike's Hard Lemonade and White Claw right now, but he was at Teneo Sports and at Gatorade when I worked with him in Chicago. He was one of the calls. And when I explained it to him, he's like, "It makes total sense. Exactly. Like, that's exactly who you are. You know, I think you're going to be great in this role." So it was fun to have a lot of people reach out with the, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And then also be able to sell people on why I was doing it. And that was the thing in HR. I was just selling the organization and selling ideas and selling in a very different way. I've always been a seller, but it was just being able to pivot my skill and, you know, focus on what I needed to sell at the moment.
How are you showing your value, right? For Tom, he's a chairman, correct?
Yeah, chairman.
Mm-hmm. What does he see in you? How are you showing your value? And I ask this question because a lot of women, and we have these conversations once a month. I meet with a group, women in sports, and sometimes they're like, I don't want to brag about myself. I don't know how to show the value that I'm bringing to the table. So clearly you're doing something right with all, you know, your whole entire journey. So how are you showing your value every day?
Jahaan, like, I'm just a loyal person, right? I've always been, maybe it could be my fatal flaw too. I'm loyal to a fault. And that's something that, like, whenever I'm invested in something, you know, Jeff will make fun of me. He's like, "You're the most brand loyal person I've ever met in my life," right? You do a deal with Toyota, the only car you'll ever buy is a Toyota, right? Like, you've always been like that. And I'm the same way with people. And if there's people who are my people, I'm going to fiercely protect them. I'm going to work as hard as I possibly can. I never want to disappoint them. But there is that, you know, how do you show your value? I don't know, to tell you the truth, because I struggle with the bragging piece of it too, right? I don't ever want to beat my chest, but, like, you know, I told you, like, I did the Toyota sign as like an afterthought and part of the story. For some people, like, that's a career type moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's like a headline for people, for sure. Let me dig a little deeper. So thinking about the directors who are out there and want to make that jump to executive, right? Talk about maybe what your meetings even look like, or what you like your directors to bring into meetings, like to talk about their wins and their successes and showing the value they bring to the table.
Yeah, so there's a couple things that I think are really important. One is being solution oriented, right? And I try to, the team that I work with right now, so I've since moved on from HR, now I'm in stadium operations, learning something totally new again. But it is something that when people come to me with problems, like, my first question is like, "So what do you think we should do?" Right? So I try to train people when they come in and we talk about, like, here are the solutions that I think we could go. And, you know, maybe there's a couple of them and we can talk through them. Like, how do we approach this? Because I think for me, it shows, you know, being prepared and being thoughtful and not just being helpless in a situation of saying, like, "Well, I don't know what to do." It's like, no, come up with an idea and and it might not be a good one. And we might do something totally different. But the fact that you've put the thought into it because you know the situation better than anybody, you're going to give me a 5-minute download on what that situation is. And you're going to expect me to make a decision based off of it. But you know what that situation is. So come to me with some solutions. So that's something that I think is really important as you continue to position yourself within an organization. The other thing, and, you know, I'll credit Tom with it, with this, is do the job, right? If it's a job you want, just go do it, right? Take on more. Find ways that you can show your value. Find ways that you can stretch yourself. Like, it might not be in your job description and it might not be on your annual goals that you have in front of you. But, like, if you are a director and you want to move to senior director, or you want to move up, find a way to differentiate yourself and find a way to do more. And prove that you can do that job before it's given to you. I mean, Tom has said time and time again when he's promoted people, you've been doing the job.
Yes, 100%. It's something I see and I hear and I've experienced when you get that promotion. I was just saying it to someone yesterday, when I got my first promotion at the Red Sox, it wasn't, I was already doing the job of a manager.
Yeah.
I was already in it. And sometimes I think, and tell me what you think here, sometimes I think people think, well, I don't want to do that job until I'm compensated for it. My experience, granted, it was about 20 years ago I was a manager, but my experience has been, maybe not that long, but it's been, no, I head down, do exactly what you said, do the job.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of the day, if it doesn't work out, I can pull back, right? If it doesn't work out, at the very least, I've had some great experience and I have something to take to the table when I present my case for that promotion.
Yeah, the compensation piece of it is, I don't think any of us got into sports for the comp. There's the passion, there's the sense of belonging, of being part of that team organization. For me, it was always bottom of the list was, comp. I mean, like I said, I was selling $5 and $8 tickets in Indianapolis, Indiana, like not necessarily the, and you got friends who are private bankers in New York and you're kind of like, that'd be nice.
Right. But it all boils down to what's important to you.
Yeah, right. I've never really focused on that piece of it, but with the promotions and with the additional responsibility, those pieces come.
Mm-hmm.
But doing the work and being successful at whatever, doing the best job that you possibly can. When I was in HR, when we were moving people internally, it was often my favorite when we'd move someone out of a department and they were doing so well in that department, we'd move them into a different role and people would cut, they're like, I could not believe so-and-so moved into this department. They're so good at what they're doing. We're like, exactly. They're so good at doing what they're doing right now that we think that they can excel in this as well. Right? Most people think that you go to someone and say, hey, is there anything else in the organization? I don't love what I'm doing right now. That's probably the last conversation that you want to have. You want to have a conversation about like, this is what I'm learning. This is what I think I've got room for growth. This is where I think I'd like to go in my career eventually. Not, I don't like what I'm doing right now. Is there something else for me? Right? I love the organization. I want to stay here, but I don't want to do that. Okay, I'd 100 times rather take the person who is like, I'm doing this. I didn't know this was a skill I could acquire. I'm working really hard at doing this. I think in my career, I'd like to learn and I'd like to eventually end up here. How do you help me get there?
Sam, you have your colleagues, employees are using their voice and asking for what they want. And then they have this executive in HR who is listening and help place them. Not push them out because they don't want to be in the role that they were given, right? Because there's that mentality in some organizations, not all, that you should be grateful to be here. There's 1,000 people who would line up for your job. So God, you're listening to them use their voice and you're helping them get to a place that they want to be. And now, if I understand it, you are the VP of stadium operations. So I'm sure there were some sad people. Some people probably sad that you left HR.
Maybe, but I also think that like it's given me the opportunity to develop relationships with people in a different way because HR is still HR, right? And you know what I mean by that? Like, where there's sometimes people are like, oh, HR just showed up, and you're like, come on, guys! But it's like the scene from Mean Girls. Yeah, but I'm like cool HR, right?
I know exactly what you mean.
Kind of how I felt. Like I'm a cool mom, It's like I try, but I'm still at the end of the day HR. So now stadium operations, I get to continue developing relationships with people in the organization. It's just a different way, and it's made me. I think going into stadium ops after being in HR has been very helpful for me because I have a pretty good sense of what everyone in the organization does. So I know who to go to. I know, who's really good at doing X, Y, and Z that we need to execute. Because quite honestly, like I'm kind of starting from not ground zero. I've got a decent base of stadium ops, but it's years and years and years of repetition and experience of understanding a building and engineering and construction and sod and field management and housekeeping and setup. There's so many things that go into stadium operations, and we do massive events at the stadium as well. I'm fortunate for who I get to work for. He's just absolutely incredible. His name's Todd Boyan. He's our SVP of stadium operations. So I'm learning a lot from him, but it's starting over. I started in stadium ops about 2 weeks before Super Bowl. So, got thrown into that, had an amazing experience for Super Bowl. And then the pandemic hits. So we're kind of like, you've kind of had a couple months of like, you just can learn what you can remotely. But we're starting to get back into the stadium now with games starting, and we're hosting fans. So I've got more of the hands-on experience moments coming here this fall.
I think there's some women who are probably listening thinking, okay, Sam's background is not in stadium ops, wasn't in an HR, but she moved into those roles. And I don't want to put one label on it, but I will say it probably has a lot to do with your leadership ability.
Jahaan, I don't know. I hope that it's because I am adaptable. I'm willing to learn. And I don't know. Again, we have these moments of like, I have a hard time bragging about myself. Mm-hmm. So I'll sit here and I'll say, I'm just fortunate to be in the organization. I love doing what I do, and I'm fortunate that I get to continue to learn. But those are the things, I'm very fortunate to be where I am. I've made decisions to get me to the place where I get to learn from really talented, smart people. I firmly believe the executive leadership team at the Dolphins and Hard Rock Stadium is best in class, diverse viewpoints, diverse experience, really creative and innovative. And that was the driving factor when I made the decision to come to Miami as opposed to going back to Atlanta, was that I'd have a new set of experiences.
You know what? I'm sure there's a lot of people probably being like, I got to go follow Sam because I want to see what's next. Because if we're watching this pattern here, what's after stadium operations, which I know you don't know the answer to, but.
I don't know. And right now I've got a lot to learn in stadium ops right now, but it's been a pretty wild ride. It's 18 years in professional sports. I have 3 kids, moved to 3 different cities with my husband.
Let's talk about that. That was my next question. So an accidental segue here. So talk about that. I mean, you were engaged when you were in Atlanta, then you convinced your fiance, I don't know if you had to convince, to move to Chicago. And then you took a different job in the agency world, and then you went to Miami. So just talk about what that's like of managing like who you authentically are. And you're a VP of stadium ops. You're just Sam, forget work. You're a mom, you're a daughter, you're a wife. How are you doing all this?
There's days where I'm not sure. But what I am very, very fortunate for is that Jeff, my husband, incredibly supportive of me, always has been. When we met, when we started dating, got engaged, he always knew part of the deal was we were going to move to Chicago. So that was the easy move. It was a good move for me. But when we were going to make the next move, he was like, we're going warm again. He's like, it's too cold here. I can't deal with it.
Jeff, we get along with my husband, Scott, then.
Yeah, he's like, I can't do it. And it's funny because we had 2 children at the time and I wanted a third. And he's like, if you can move me somewhere warm by the time I turn 40, you can have a third kid. So I literally move him to almost the southernmost professional sports team in the country, besides the Heat, maybe, and Marlins are a little bit further south than us. We landed here in Miami on, I think, 2 weeks before his 40th birthday. So I've got my third kid and everything's good. But it is definitely chaos.
Well done. What advice would you give women who are managing all of those things as well?
Don't be so hard on yourself, right? There's moments where you're like, I am just failing at this, right? Because it's like, in order to have those moments of like, you feel like you kind of got it all together, like something's eventually going to drop. And when it does, it's okay. Just figure out how to fix it. And don't be hard on yourself, because like, you can't wallow in it for too long, because it just like it spirals you. And for me, it's always been like, pick yourself back up by the bootstraps and get going again. And I might have one night that's really hard, but other than that, you get it out, you figure out how, again, coming with a solution. How does it get better? Because it can't continue this way. Mm-hmm. So figuring out what compromise you need to make somewhere else. And you may have been focused on work. And like, you notice that your kid's not doing well at school or he's struggling doing X, Y, and Z. And part of it is like, because you haven't been around. So like, how do you adjust your schedule to just make sure that you find those pockets of time to spend the time with your children or with your husband? Managing that relationship is really tough. He's home with the kids. We're homeschooling him right now because of everything else going on. It takes work, and you have to put the work in order to get the results that you want. So all had our moments where it's just been bad. But figure out what the solutions are and put some resolve behind you and know that you can do it because you've done it so far. And you really are in control of your own destiny if you kind of put your mind to it and you make the time for prioritizing what's important.
Yes. Okay. I feel like I should say amen or something. That was good.
But I don't golf anymore, Jahaan. Like, that's kind of like the trade-off. There's time for golf. We're done. One day.
Yes, one day. If it makes you feel any better, I have 2 dogs. And for some reason this year, I've only golfed once. I don't know what's happening. Business is growing, so maybe we'll attribute it to business.
Okay.
Yes. All right. Thinking about your journey, It's been an incredible one. What's one thing you would do different?
Well, that's interesting. So I'd go back to school when I was at Indiana, and I was a sport communication broadcast major. I would have been a business major.
Say more.
I think 20 years ago, the business of sport was not as mature as it is right now. Like, I started off working for a lot of family-run businesses. Like, some of the organizations I was working for were very family-oriented. Fast forward to looking at what the Dolphins and Hard Rock Stadium, what the Braves are, what the Cubs are now. Those are like, they're professionally run businesses, right? Reading books, finance for the non-financial manager, not exactly exciting. But those are things that I never took in school that like I probably should have and would have set me up much better in advancing my career and being able to think critically about like the different business problems that we have and learning. I had to learn P&Ls by looking at them and listening to people and trying to understand it and like looking it up myself instead of like that being part of my background. So when people have come to me and they talk to me about school and what they want to do, I always encourage going to get a business degree. It is something that I think is transferable across so many different opportunities. And I personally don't believe that you need a sport management, sport communication, whatever it may be, to be in sports. And I think, as we continue to look for diverse viewpoints and we continue to look for different backgrounds, like having people who are less oriented on sports is really beneficial to the organization.
Yeah, yes. I'm going to play that clip right there for some people I've just talked to this week who are worried that they don't have the sports experience, so they're not going to be able to get in. I was like, oh, careful the story you're telling yourself. That's not accurate. Not all teams. A lot of teams are moving away from that model.
Yeah. I mean,
right.
Jahaan, like when we were at the Cubs, we know there were interns who had to get pulled out of locker rooms because they'd sneak themselves in and because they were so obsessed with the team, they were distracting from like what their job was. I was always more interested in getting people who are interested in the business of sport into the organization, as opposed to the first person who comes to you and says, I am the biggest Cubs fan ever. It's like, okay, we might have a problem.
Yes.
Yeah. Because
red flag.
Yes, the fandom. It's too much. And in certain roles, it's okay. But when you know that there's a lot more to be done than just being there for the game, like I can't tell you the last time I've watched a full sporting event.
Yeah.
I don't know when it is. I've never watched a game. I don't think I've watched a game in 15 years, end to end. Yes. I went to a Blackhawks game during the Stanley Cup Finals. That was, call it 2009 or 10. Yes. I think that's.
It is so nice to go to another game.
It is.
That's not your own team that you're working for. It feels good. So tell me, you have told us so much. I'm sure there's some women out there who are thinking, Sam's my girl. I want to connect with her. How can someone connect with you?
Sure. You find me on LinkedIn. I'm there. I check it often. I'm not real active on any other social media platform. I do a little bit of, I call it doom scrolling right now on Twitter, just seeing what's happening in the world, but I'm not real active out there. But I'd say LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach out, and happy to help however I can. we're starting a women's network at the Dolphins in Hard Rock Stadium right now, kind of led by myself and the three other women VPs in the organization. And it's just a group we've got a shared set of experiences. We make it light, make it informative, have some fun with it. We're really proud of the women that we've brought into the organization, talented and diverse and smart. And so just trying to really create, especially while we're distant, more of a community amongst us.
That's fantastic. I'm going to be picking your brain and hear more about that.
All right. Happy to do that.
This was fantastic. I appreciate the time. Thank you, Sam, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. And just as one parting word, I hope everyone takes the opportunity to register and vote.
Yes. So what did you think of this episode? Do you know another woman who works or is aspiring to work in sports? Would you do me a favor and share this with them? It would mean so much if together we could support and inspire other women on their journey. And let's stay connected. I love meeting and talking to new people. Follow me on Instagram at Jahaan Blake and join the free Game of Her Own community by visiting jahaanblake.com. I can't wait to meet you.